In today's video, I want to show you how we can create a beautiful landscape from scratch. Let's check it out. Welcome back for another blending graphics tutorial, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Jason Ortega, and today I have something a little bit different in store for you. We are going to create a scene from scratch. When I first started creating compositions within Photoshop, one of the areas that I struggled most with was just creating an environment or a scene for my subject. I often knew what I wanted to accomplish and how I wanted the overall picture to look, but I struggled greatly with putting all those different elements together in a cohesive manner that resembled that image that I had in my head. This is definitely an area that I experimented with a lot and practiced over and over with, and I'm much more confident now than I was a couple years ago. However, I'm still not where I would love to be, but I think that's just me personally and how I am with anything, and I'm sure you can relate as well. You know, we can always continue to practice our skills and get better and better each day. So what I'm hoping with this video I can accomplish is to maybe give you some ideas if this is also an area that you struggle with, and just give you some tips and tricks that might be able to help you out in that area. I also plan on making a series out of this, so if this is something that interests you, or after watching this video you really enjoy, please drop me a comment if there's maybe an environment that you would like to see me create in the future. Let's go ahead and jump right into this project. The environment that we're going to create is going to be a snowy landscape. So let's go ahead and show you some of the images that we're working with. We have the northern lights, and we got some snowy mountains and water, as well as some icebergs that are all going to be incorporated with this composition. So to get things started, I'm going to turn on this water layer here, and we're going to press Command T and scale this up quite a bit. I'm only going to use the water from this image itself. So let's go ahead and just position this somewhere that I like, and then we can press that check mark or press Enter. And then using the rectangular marquee tool, we're just going to select this top part to where it touches the water. And then we're going to fill that layer mask with black by pressing either Option or Alt and backspace, making sure that black is in our foreground color. And then press Command D to deselect. From here we can load in our first layer of snow that we're going to use. And we're just going to move this up a little bit to where the water is going to meet the bottom edge of that snow. So somewhere right around here. And then we can hit that check mark to commit that. Let's go ahead and put a layer mask on this. And then using the pen tool, I'm just going to go ahead and quickly select the top part of this so we can get rid of the sky. Now I want to go into my brushes and pick a hard tip brush, and all I want to do with this is just kind of tweak this a little bit and round it out just a bit more. Let's go ahead and now turn on our next background snow layer, and we're going to move this up just to where I can see this whole rock image on the right, and using the pen tool up, we're just going to select this. And once we have the whole thing selected, we're going to create a layer mask so that way only that part is visible. Now we can go ahead and just drag this down so it fits nicely with our ground layer. I'm going to pause this for just a second to go over a quick tip that I think you should know. Whenever you're gathering images for your composition, and especially for a project like this where we're creating a scene, it's important to, one, gather images that are very similar to one another, especially having very similar horizon lines. Also making sure that the photos are taken at the same time of day will help out a lot. And making sure that the sun is coming from the same angle. And those are all things that will definitely save you a lot of time, and you're not going to have to tweak later on with your composition. I also gather a lot of different images that are focused in on different depth perceptions, if that makes sense. So I like to have images where maybe a rock is zoomed in really close that we can see, or maybe the photo is taken at a landscape from very far away. So I just try to gather those different images, and that's going to help us create that depth of field within our own composition. All right, let's go ahead and get back to our composition, and we're just going to, first of all, move this off to the side just a little bit more, and then we can bring in our first mountain landscape, and we can load that in, drag it up a little bit. But this time I'm just going to skip forward so you don't see me selecting the sky. And we can just have the mountains. So here we are. From here we can bring in our sky image, which are going to be the northern lights. Let's drag this up, and then we're going to scale this up quite a bit as well, so that way you don't see the bottom part of this image. So that looks pretty good. Maybe we'll come back in and tweak these mountains up just a little bit as well. Bring them down just ever so slightly. Alright, I think that looks good. And now we can just touch up this little spot here and get rid of that, since that's a bit distracting. And with all of that in place, we can now start bringing in some of the ice, which we're going to incorporate into this water here below. So we're just going to select this top part because we don't need that. We'll fill that with black. And then we can press Command T so we can just move this up just a bit. And then we're going to press Command G to give that a group, and we'll give it a title. From here, we can add a hue and saturation adjustment layer, clip it onto that layer. And we're essentially just going to play around with the cyans and the blues and desaturate those quite a bit so that way both of our water images match much better. And that's looking much better from here. We can see the before and after of that adjustment layer. And now I want to add a hue and saturation adjustment layer to the first water layer that we have, and we're going to boost the saturation on that as well so it's not too dull. And then we can go back to the other one that we were just at. Again, we're just tweaking this so that way they look very similar to one another in both the hue and the saturation. And I'm pretty satisfied with this. Let's bring in a soft round brush, and we're just going to paint away some of this so that we don't have that really harsh line. And this is going to help blend both of these images much better. So just a bit around each of these areas here. All right, that looks good. Let's bring in our next layer of ice. And this is actually a prime example of what I was talking about before, where you want to get a variety of images taken at different depths. So we have one that the ice is much further away, and now we have one that is taken much closer up that we're going to use more for our foreground ice. And since this middle area is a bit cluttered with all the ice, I'm just erasing a lot of this from our top ice layer image. And now we face that same problem again where we have two different colored water layers. So we're adding a hue and saturation adjustment layer again, so that way we can tweak this up and make sure that the water is matching both with the hue and saturation. And there are several ways to still accomplish this same task. However, I personally like to use the hue and saturation adjustment layer the most, just because I think it's the easiest and fastest way to get that result I'm looking for. You can also use selective color, but it's all about personal preference. Anyways, I'm now going in on this layer here and removing a lot of the water, just because I prefer to see the water from our original layer because it has more waves and it doesn't look so still. And I'd rather have that look. So this is where it gets really tedious, just going in between each of these little bit of icebergs that we have going on here and removing the water from this layer. And now our water is looking pretty good. Let's jump back to our mountain layer, and we're going to give it a bit of a Gaussian blur, just because we want to create that depth of field and blur it just a little bit so it's not so sharp and it's not going to be our main focus. And then we're going to apply the same blur onto our ground layer as well, after I go ahead and just organize myself a little bit here. And big tip, especially when you start working with a lot of layers, take the time to go ahead and name them. You're going to thank me later, and you're going to save yourself a lot of time as well in the end. All right, so just change that just a little bit more, and we can press OK. Going to our mountain layers, we're going to add a levels adjustment layer, and we're going to clip it onto the mountains, and we're just going to create a bit more contrast by bringing in both of these anchors on the shadows and the highlights. And now we can apply a brightness and contrast adjustment layer. We'll bring down the brightness, and we'll also bring down the contrast just a little bit as well. All right, we can jump over to the rock on our right side. We'll add a levels adjustment layer, and we'll bring down the highlights so we can darken that up a little bit. And we can play around with the tones as well. We'll add a color balance adjustment layer, and we're going to kind of gravitate towards those blues and magentas a little bit so that way we can match the colors going on with our sky. Okay, that looks pretty good. Let's do the same thing with our ground layer, and we'll click on here and add a color balance adjustment layer. clip it onto that layer, and we'll stick with those same colors to help complement the sky. I'm actually going to put in a levels adjustment layer just below here first to help with our lighting levels. And word of the wise, it's best to get the lighting the way you want it to look first, and then go ahead and add the color grading second, just because if you add the levels adjustment layer on top of the color grading, then your colors will start to desaturate a little bit, and you don't want that. So the way I always work with any of my objects, I do lighting, color grading, and then I do my highlights and shadows afterwards. You can now see that our mountain sticks out a bit like a sore thumb. So let's go ahead and decrease the highlights from that with another levels adjustment layer, and we're going to decrease the highlights from this bar here. And then I'm going to go back into our brightness and contrast layer mask and just erase a little bit on that right side so we can bring back some of the highlights. I don't want that to be completely disappeared. So just touch this up just a little bit. I now want to add a selective color adjustment layer to this because our magenta is still way too prominent on this mountain. So we're going to go into the magentas, we'll add some more cyan, and we'll decrease the magentas to help balance things out just a little bit more. And then we can add a color balance adjustment layer on top of that to help round things out and blend with the other images that we have. And this is making a huge adjustment, and everything is starting to come together very cohesive and is looking really nice. And then we want to group those layers together, and we can go to our foreground, group those layers. Throughout this whole process, I'm just doing my best to keep myself as organized as possible. I'm going to add a levels adjustment to our foreground, so now we can start lowering the lighting of our foreground layers. And now that our levels are looking good, let's add a color balance adjustment layer and start to tweak some of that. And this is my favorite part of working in any of my compositions, because now you can start to see all of these elements come together and you can start to see that light at the end of the tunnel. All right, let's go ahead and see a before and after our color balance. What a huge difference that makes. And I know I'm going to sound like a broken record when I say this, but Photoshop has all of these tools that can create the same result. And, it's all about personal preference. I love using the color balance adjustment layer to help match colors between objects. I think it's the easiest way to do so. Maybe you disagree with me, and that's okay. This is just something that I've been using a lot, and I find it very helpful and very efficient when I'm using this adjustment layer. All right, so one of the last things that I like to do to help bring everything together is I like to create some atmosphere effects. So I'm going to use one of my cloud brushes, and I'm just going to go ahead and paint some haze in this background here. And as I do this, it's best to use the color picker to select some of the colors within your composition and maybe use just a little bit of a brighter tone to it, and also to use different cloud brushes so that way you have a bit of a variety and not the same pattern over and over. And so I'm just going to touch up just a couple more spots within this composition. Okay, and here we are. This is our final product. I like the way this turned out. Hopefully you did as well. If you tune in tomorrow, this composition that we just created is actually going to be our scene for our subject that we are going to create tomorrow, and then incorporate that into this picture here. I hope to see you again tomorrow. Again, leave a comment if you want to see more videos like this in the future, or if you have a suggestion of an environment that you would like to see from me and create. And if you enjoyed this tutorial, please be sure to hit that subscribe button and click that bell icon to stay notified for future posted videos. Thanks a lot for joining me. Take care, everyone.